Okay, so let's look at the last part of aerobic respiration. So we've already looked at the glycolysis, transition reaction, and the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle. So the last part here is called oxidative phosphorylation. And oxidative phosphorylation is going to make the most ATP. So those other parts made only combined 4 ATP. So this is where we're going to make most of the ATP, so 26 to 28 ATP out of oxidative phosphorylation. And oxidative phosphorylation is actually two parts. We have the electron transport chain, and we also have another part called chemo osmosis. So this occurs within the mitochondria and occurs on the cristae. So that is the folds in the membrane. And so looking at this picture here, when you look at it, here is the cristae here, that membrane. And then here is the matrix, and this is that intermembrane space. So it's space between the membranes. All right, so this is where oxidative phosphorylation occurs. So the first part here is called the electron transport chain. So the electron transport chain is a series of enzymes that extract energy from electrons. So we're going to start off with high energy electrons at the beginning of this. We're going to end up with low energy electrons at the end. So all the NADHs and FADH2s that we got from the glycolysis, transition reaction, and Krebs cycle are going to come here. And so you can see NADH, FADH2. And so we're going to remove those electrons from those molecules. And so what we do here is through these enzymes, we're going to extract the energy from those electrons, and we're going to pump hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space. All right? So that's what occurs here. So we take those high energy electrons, extract energy from those, pump hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space. So what that does is it creates a lot of hydrogen ions here in that intermembrane space, few hydrogen ions here in the matrix. All right? And so here, those hydrogen ions cannot diffuse through this membrane. They're unable to go through that membrane. So we end up here, lots of hydrogen ions here, few hydrogen ions there. All right? Now, here's where oxygen plays its role. And after I get done with this, you're going to be like, that's it? And now I'm going to say, yeah, that's it. So after those electrons move through electron transport chain, we need some place to put them. All right? And so we literally put them onto an oxygen atom and add 2 hydrogen ions, and that makes the water. And that's it. So those high oxygen atoms are really just places that we put those high energy electrons. That's all their function there. Okay? But if we don't have oxygen to take in those high energy or those low energy electrons, electron transport chain, oxidative phosphorylation doesn't happen, the Krebs cycle doesn't happen, and the transition reaction doesn't happen. So we shift from doing aerobic respiration to doing anaerobic respiration. Okay, so let's move on to chemo osmosis. So chemo osmosis is the production of ATP using energy from hydrogen ion gradients across membranes to phosphorylate ADP. I know, I just said a lot of words there. So what's going to happen here is that we have a lot of hydrogen ions here, few hydrogen ions here. Hydrogen ions cannot diffuse through this membrane, so the only way they can diffuse is through this enzyme known as ATP synthase. And this is a protein complex that synthesizes or makes ATP. So, as hydrogen ions move through this enzyme, all right, I'm going to move ahead to this picture here. So as those hydrogen ions move through this enzyme, they turn the enzyme, and that energy of motion is used, that kinetic energy is used to grab this phosphate ion and attach it onto an ADP to make an ATP. So since those hydrogen ions cannot diffuse through the membranes, they have to diffuse through the ATP synthase. This turns this turbine to add a phosphate ion onto ADP, making ATP. And this is how we make most of our ATP. So let's look at our net total here. So we only make 2 ATP in glycolysis, no ATP in the transition reaction. We make only 2 ATP in the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle, and we make most of our ATP in oxidative phosphorylation. So you can see one glucose makes anywhere from 30 to 32 ATP. Now glucose is a monosaccharide. Monosaccharides are carbohydrates. So when we take in a complex carbohydrate like starch or something like that, we're going to break that down in our digestive tract into glucose, and we absorb that glucose into our blood. Okay? So, but do we only eat carbohydrates? No. We also eat proteins, and we also eat lipids. So let's look at those in energy. So, proteins, when we ingest a protein, proteins are broken down into amino acids by the digestive system, and that's what gets absorbed into our blood. Now, so if we don't use those amino acids to make a protein, we're going to break down those amino acids for energy. And so those amino acids are going to go to our liver, and they're undergo a process called deamination. In deamination, we're going to chop off the nitrogen on that amino acid, and we're going to make ammonia out of it. So now the rest of that amino acid can be used for energy. And we're either going to convert that into pyruvate or acetyl-CoA, and they're going to work their way through aerobic respiration that way. Now, when we take in a lipid, lipids or fats and oils, that's primarily most of the lipids that we eat, those are triglycerides. And triglycerides are made of glycerol and fatty acids. So that's what happens when we take in a triglyceride into our digestive tract. We're going to break it down into glycerol and 3 fatty acids. The glycerol is converted into G3P or pyruvate, and it's going to work its way through. The fatty acids are broken down into many acetyl-CoAs. So each acetyl-CoA molecule is made of 2 carbons, and a fatty acid is anywhere from 16 to 18 carbons in length. So we're going to get anywhere from 8 to 9 acetyl-CoAs out of a single fatty acid. All right? So what this tells us then is one glucose makes anywhere from 30 to 32 ATP. One lipid is going to make about 250 ATP. Now this isn't exactly apples to apples comparison, and the reason is that a lipid is a much larger molecule than a glucose. So let's look at it apples to apples. 1 gram of a carbohydrate is equal to 4 calories, where 1 gram of a lipid is equal to 9 calories. So eating 1 gram of a lipid is going to give us more than twice the amount of energy. Conversely, if we were wanting to store that energy, that's why we use lipids for storage, because we can store more than twice the amount of energy than we could with a carbohydrate. Just to let you know, 1 gram of a protein is 4 calories, and 1 gram of alcohol is equal to 4 calories. Now, those aren't food calories. A food calorie is a kilocalorie. All right, so you need 1,000 calories to equal 1 food calorie with a capital C. So this is showing a chart looking at kilocalories consumed per activities. All right, so you can see these, and this is not included for your body maintenance. You're going to use anywhere from 1,600 to 2,200 kilocalories per day for your body's maintenance. So this shows activities that you would have to do in addition to that to work off some extra energy. Now, I'll just let you know, 1 pound of fat is equal to 3,500 kilocalories. If you run a 7-minute mile, you'll expend about 1,000 calories in an hour, all right? So if you ran a marathon, which would take you a little over 3 hours, you would almost work off 1 pound of fat, but not quite. Now, I'm not telling you not to run. What I'm saying is it's much easier not to put calories into us than to try to work them out after the fact.